Last but not least, we have a panel discussion here on Varroa strategies and future directions, and that will be moderated by Matthew.
All right, so if we can welcome to the front Derek Micholson, Dani Glennie, Dr. Nuria Morfin, and Mr. Bob Binnie.
Oh boy, I gotta sit up here with all these smart people and act like I'm one of them.
So do we have what, 2 mics or 3? Okay. The third? How many mics you got there?
Well, just give us that one because it's cordless. And
There you
that
go.
one. Look like that. That one just.
I think we have one more mic.
You want to use this one for reference?
Yes,
Or for questions?
for now, yes. Yeah, so what we'll do is we'll ask a few questions of the panel here, and then we'll try to take some questions from the audience, so hopefully we'll have time for that. So I want to start off with managing Varroa, where managing Varroa begins. So that's monitoring. But first, just for some context, I'd like to ask Dr. Morfin to kind of set us up by talking to us about the differences between an economic threshold and an economic injury level.
Well, thank you, Matthew. And I guess if I have to be very brief, the economic threshold tells us the level of mites in your colony that indicates that you need to treat. So if you go monitor your mite levels, let's say that the economic threshold is 3%, because someone calculated that number for you, and you go to the KRTP and they give you that recommendation. So you go to your colonies, do a mite shake, and you know that there's 3% mite levels in your colony. If that is the economic threshold, then you need to treat right away. If not, you're going to be in big troubles. Because if you don't treat, the curve of Varroa mite growth will continue to increase and reach a level that is called the economic injury level. The economic injury level means that you are too late and harm has been done. What type of harm? It could be that the colonies are weak, that you won't be able to produce nukes, that you will be producing way less honey, or in the worst case, that you will lose the colony. So economic threshold is action, economic injury level, you are too late.
Thank you. Thank you. That clarifies a lot, and I think so we would think about the economic threshold being here, and then the economic injury level being up here. With your study in BC, you showed that the economic injury level was actually 1% for spring, survival, right? Is that correct?
That is correct. So in BC, the economic injury level was calculated at 1%. That means that the economic threshold, we don't know what it is, but we know is less than 1%. So that changes our IPM strategy, because we know that we have to do everything in our power to keep mite levels below that threshold throughout the season.
Thank you. So before we talk about actually treating mites, I just wanted to ask a question about monitoring. So speaking to beekeepers over this past year, for example, I always kind of ask them, what are your mite levels, but also how did you come to that? How did you determine those mite levels? We're all most commonly using the alcohol shake. So that's pretty simple for the most part. But, there's a lot of variables that can be involved, time points in the year, before or after treatments. How many colonies did you test per yard to kind of get an idea of what's going on? How many yards did you check in that region, or did you check all your yards? We hear of people doing the typical individual sample, one sample per colony, but I've also heard from a lot of people doing pooled samples. So those pooled samples, some people are saying they do 50 bees per hive in a pooled sample, some are doing 100 bees per hive in a pooled sample, and how many colonies are you pulling that pooled sample from, and then making your interpretation. So but I think a lot of us beekeepers would do things differently. We're under different time constraints and labor constraints. So I just kind of wanted to talk about maybe the variations in our monitoring and how some of the beekeepers here on our panel approach monitoring right now. So if we can start with Dani, that'd be great.
I've never shaken so many bees as I have in the last few years. We used to just shake one time in the spring. I like to call this the golden era of Apivar. And then put our treatment in and just walk away. But now we are shaking more and more often. So we still shake in the spring. We used to take a yard sample, so like 10 bees from every hive. And I got a few beekeepers with me, so we're shaking multiple shakers. Now as mite levels are getting higher and we're finding pockets of them, and I'm trying to create breeding programs that are helping me with mite loads, I get rid of the high mites. So I'm shaking a pallet of bees now, so I'll sample the 4 hives in March on my pallet, shaking a pooled sample of them. If that sample shows anything over 4, 5, 6 mites, I then shake those hives individually to find which ones are producing mites, and then I shake that sucker into the snowbank and kick the snow over the bees. I don't want that queen in my operation. I don't want those drones breeding with my nukes. I want mites. I want bees that can control mites and have low mite controls. So then we put our Apivar in. We'll come back. We'll shake those bees again in April in the next round of beekeeping. I want to know what the mite levels are after the treatment because Apivar is failing. I want to know where it's working, where it's not working. Then we come back with oxalic. We clean up with oxalic. And then in June before honey production, and I got people standing around, I just send more people out to shake. I want to know what the mite levels are going into honey production so that I can be prepared for after honey production treatment and what that looks like. And then I will put on my fall treatment in late August, beginning of September, and then in October I will shake again to know. So I'm shaking a lot all the time. When we're not doing a pooled sample, like it's easy to take off the lid in March, right? Like the research showed that you can do that, it works. In the later seasons, I'm shaking 6 hives in a yard off a brood frame, and every time we come back, we write on the lid, okay, well this one had 1 mite, or this one had 0 mite, or this one had 6 mites, or, so the next time I come back to shake, I'm shaking a different hive in that yard. So eventually, throughout the season, I'm shaking like quite a few of my bees, like 80% of my bees.
That's really cool. Maybe if we could hear from Bob next.
Well, what I do probably wouldn't work that great up here. We have the advantage of that August dearth, so I pay close attention to that time period. Up until this year, I've just perhaps shaken 6 or 8 colonies in a yard, and if I don't see anything alarming, I left it at that. But next year, you'll see me taking many yards and shaking every colony in the yard because I'm going to begin seeking out the exceptional colonies. And we had a few last year, like we had 1 yard that we were shaking anywhere from 5 to 10 mites, and we have 2 colonies that get zeros. Well, that's the beginning of a breeding program, right? So that's going to be my attitude this year. And I brought a lot of bees in from other, like you talk about bringing in the good stuff from other people. I've done a lot of that, several hundred colonies, and I'm going to start paying very close attention to them and washing them often and the complete yard. I like she says, my mite level is 0. That's my tolerable level. No mites, no problem. It really is as simple as that. Whenever I see my outfit giving me a bunch of zeros, my beekeeping practices are much like they were 44 years ago when I started. So it really is almost as simple as that. Of course, listening to that talk about the chemicals, that's alarming too. I've kind of suspected that chemicals is getting way out of hand, so that's part of it. I know the question was about shaking mites. I kind of went all over the place. Yeah, we shake 6 or 8 colonies in a yard right now. If we don't see anything alarming, we just leave it at that and move on.
Derek or Nuria, did you want to add anything on this, or should we?
Sure. I guess, what I typically recommend is about 8 colonies per yard, a general yard of 40. The more the better. I think with the development of resistance that we're seeing, it's increasingly important to be sampling individual colonies and more if possible. Because usually when we're seeing resistance pop up, it's just in 1 or 2 colonies here and there. At least with Amatraz, it seems to be a little bit different than with Apistan or resistance to Coumaphos. So yeah, the more the better. It's definitely a balance of time and resources for the beekeeper, and whether that means pooling samples initially and trying to get a rough idea of where you're at, and then maybe if you have some more time, focusing in on individual colonies. But I'm actually curious to know between the two of you, like what your setup is for shaking that many samples, because using those field shakers is quite time intensive, just those individual samples. So do either of you have, lab shaking, like table shakers?
I'm going to start taking them home. Up until this year, everything was done in the yard and put down in our notebook. But when I start doing whole yards, I'm just going to collect samples and take them home. I'm not going to do all that in the bee yard.
I have people that require jobs, and so like when I get tired of making up jobs, I send people out for a week and shake the operation. So, and I don't have to come up with another job for a week for them. So, yeah, we use a hand shaker, and we're shaking 6 in a yard. So it's not like, and then you drive to the next one. Like it's not like cumbersome at all for anybody.
Yeah, I just imagine shaking the operation. I like that phrase. Just imagine the operation shaking.
I guess just one more point here. I guess the other thing I was going to mention is that sticky boards are, we haven't really touched on sticky boards yet. Those are definitely still an option. And we've talked about tropolaelaps possibly coming in because tropolaelaps does not have that same phoretic period as Varroa. Possibly really no phoretic period at all. It spends the majority of its time in the brood. Those, sampling methods, alcohol washes and sugar shakes, those don't really work for tropolaelaps. So we have to be looking at different ways of monitoring for tropy. And I know we're talking about Varroa here, but I think in the future, I think sticky boards are going to become even more important if tropy does come in.
So given the growing concern about Amitraz resistance, I guess I kind of just want to talk about a general approach to mite control. Dani, you had spoken about, you kind of went over it really quickly. If you could take us through a little bit of that slowly, but I'm particularly curious, what is your preferred treatment late June or sometime in June? And then you said you usually get your first treatment on post-harvest. Like, what's your go-to at that period, if you have one, or are you constantly rotating?
We've been lucky enough that Apivar is still working for us at an efficacy rate that we're still seeing results, and then following up with oxalic as to get that final kill kind of on everything. So luckily our June results are zeros mostly, like the odd one, right? But they always say like one mite turns into 1,500 mites, right? So you know that they're there. And when we have done treatments in the past, like oxalic, we've put the sticky boards in, right? And a 0 shake on the hive before the treatment and a 1 shake on the hive before the treatment yields 100 mite drop, no matter what. The mites are there. It just says 0 in that shake, right? I believe that the 0 and the 1s are the same. You can't say you have no mites. You just haven't seen the mites there yet, right? So don't believe that 0s are a good thing. The mites are just there. They're just under control at the moment. And then for fall treatment, we usually put Formic on. I put Formic Pro on just because some yards have supers, some yards don't have supers. So we're just like tipping up the boxes and jamming the gel pad in there. And it's just a little bit beekeeper friendly and efficient at that time. I'm trying to do a lot of yards very quickly before the supers come off, the pails go on, like you start the next round of operational management.
Now, I don't have any data behind this. I would like to get some data behind this, but just a field observation. If I go into a yard and I check 10 colonies working with a producer and we have 8 zeros, 1 and 1 mite, okay. But if I go in and I check and we see 1 mite, 2 mites for 8 colonies, all of them have 1 and 2 mites, and then 2 bombs kind of. For me, that's starting to look like a ticking time bomb. So I think the zeros are an important number, but not a single 0. Maybe 20 zeros are an important number. It's just a perception, but if you have any other comment on that.
Yeah, anything when we put those sticky boards in, we were shaking a high mite yard. So we had anywhere from 0 and 1 to 26 and 64 in that yard, right? And then we hit them with the oxalic vaporization and went back for the sticky boards. And like the mite drop was just like some of them were, like you couldn't count them, right? Anything over that 7 mite shake, like washer shake, you couldn't count the mites on the sticky board. They like you wouldn't have enough time. So
Yeah.
we really try and like as low as can be, right? And I'm looking for genetics. I'm looking for things that can help us out. So I have a lot of high selection pressure on those hives. I don't want anything that can't work with the bees or have low mite growth. You know, we talk lots about that in the new research and stuff. Like it's not that you don't have mites, it's that you have low mite growth. They work with, the bees work in helping you to control them.
So I got a question, the same question for Bob here, and then with a bit of a, maybe just on top of that, I see you've been talking about rotations and how to rotate chemicals in your talk earlier and on your YouTube. So feel free to bring that up as well in your approach, if your approach has changed over the past years.
Yeah, it's changed a lot. I remember the days of one treatment in the fall, and that was it. So yeah, times have changed. I don't use any synthetics at all. I haven't used an Apivar or an Amatraz product in probably 5 years. The last time I used it, I was shocked, and I did a beginner's boo-boo. I just assumed it worked till I came back a month later and saw a bunch of sick brood. I'm gonna make the effort to not allow that to ever happen to me again. That's a beginner's mistake right there. So, and that's where the mite checking comes in. Always, always, always check after you treat to make sure that it worked. So in the spring, I've got all zeros now. I cannot find a mite, which you're right, I got mites. Trust me, I got no illusions. But we were testing mites several weeks ago when everything was broodless, and we were coming up with zeros. So that's a pretty good sign right there. So I think I'm going to wait until I'm done splitting in late March and into mid-April, and then put the oxalic acid strips on, whether they're homemade. I know you guys can't do that, but and we're not supposed to do it either, but somehow the inspectors allow us to. They just kind of look away. So at that time, I'm going to put some sort of form of oxalic acid strips on and ride with that through the summer, and then do the thymol on the 1st of August. Again, I don't mind the shutdown in August, which the thymol does. And I like the thymol because it has an antiseptic influence on the colony. It's obvious to me. Thymol versus Apivar, you can see the Apivar perhaps clean the mites up faster, and maybe see the colony continue to rear brood, whereas with the thymol, the brood stops, the colony shrinks, but sometime later on in October or November, they look equal again, and then the thymol colonies seem to be healthier through winter because of this antiseptic influence. That's my opinion. It's just casual observation, so you have to be aware of that. So I like that thymol treatment, and we are extremely big on doing, in fact, I think it's the key to everything I do, is doing at least 2 oxalic acid vaporizations in winter when they're broodless, and making sure we're doing it at the right temperature, doing it right. And that's why we have 0 mites in our washes, in late December when they were broodless. So we're going into the season in really, really good shape. But I've learned it so much the hard way. Don't ever let your guard down,
Yeah, if Derek or Nuria, if you want to add anything, and then we'll open up for some questions. So think of what you want to might ask.
I forget what the actual question was.
Yeah,
but,
we're just talking about future approaches moving forward, especially in light of, concerns about resistance, but.
Yeah, I mean, just to hone in on that, just consistent monitoring, I think, and if you're monitoring right after honey supers come off and you're seeing zeros at that time, there's still tons of brood in the colonies. That doesn't mean you don't need to treat. Sample again, maybe sample again, and again throughout the fall, as that brood is emerging and all those mites are coming out of the brood. So yeah, just not letting your guard down. The one other thing I was going to say, just with the kind of the changing seasons that we're seeing and extended falls and earlier springs, just that calendar beekeeping can't rely on that anymore. Beekeepers kind of have to keep up with the changes in the seasons that we're seeing. There's different seasons in different climate, different areas all over the place, and beekeepers doing really well in different areas. But these changes that we're seeing, I think the beekeepers just need to keep up with those changes and stay in tune, and I think consistent monitoring is just a huge part of that. If you're putting Apivar in a lot earlier than usual, let's say in March, it's coming out a lot earlier than usual. Monitoring after that, there's probably still a good window of time before the main honey flow. So yeah, keeping all those things in mind.
Thank you. Questions? Got Daryl right here.
I just, I just wanted to get some help with clarification on sticky boards. Are you using sticky boards with natural drop, or are you using your chemical and then looking at your sticky boards afterwards? And how do you quantify that?
It was, like I said, it was just a high mite yard, so we shook that yard, we put the sticky boards in, and then we used an oxalic vapor to see the mite drop and what it was. And then the correlation between what we had in the shaker and what we got for the mite drop with oxalic acid, with oxalic vapor, sorry.
Yeah, I can just kind of add to that too. I think the thresholds that Rob Curry had developed with sticky boards in the past, I think it's one mite over a 24-hour period on a sticky board is roughly 1% in your colony. It's not perfect because at different times of the year, there's, your population is changing and there's more mites in there, more mites are falling. But it is a monitoring tool, and there are some kind of rough guidelines out there, and those thresholds are in the Manitoba Honeybee Health Treatment Guide every year. So you can kind of follow that as a rough guideline. But yeah, just keep in mind the changes throughout the season and population and mite dynamics and all that.
Say something. I don't use sticky boards, but I have a friend who does, and he has a pretty good trick. He puts a sticky board in, and he keeps treating until he starts to get no drop. That's a pretty good trick, I think. Pretty simple.
Well, I guess maybe for new beekeepers or people that are starting, it can get really confusing and really frustrating. But if I could simplify things, would be do or monitor for mites as often as you can and use one method. Get good at one method. If you're using alcohol wash, use alcohol wash. If you use sticky boards, use sticky boards. So you can have you would be able to compare. So you can go before treatment, you treat, and after treatment, and you would be able to compare and see what's happening.
The question to speakers. For example, if we restrict the level of the number of brood in the late summer, beginning of this fall, do you think does it impact on the number of mites in the hive?
I would say absolutely. Using cultural and mechanical methods to reduce mite levels is one of the tools that we have. So brood interruption, using drone frames, absolutely. Dividing your colony, anything that disrupts the mite's life cycle will help with mite growth. There's a recent study that was published. They used screen bottom boards with a sticky paper and mite treatment, and they noticed that combining the two methods was more effective to control mite growth compared to only using the treatment that they applied. So always incorporating control methods, mechanical and cultural methods are a good choice.
I just happen to know a number on screen bottom boards. I allowed 50 of my colonies to be a study at the University of Georgia on screen bottom boards, and they found that the screen bottom boards colonies versus the controls had 14.6% less mites, so that's an interesting number.
Well, we see very low mites in the nukes usually because they've had a brood break, right? Between us pulling the brood and the new virgin mating and starting to lay, that brood break just helps control mites and just allows our colonies to be a little refreshed, right, too. So I can see where a natural brood break is works well as part of your mite load reduction.
Yeah, go ahead, Laura.
How early do you think is too early to give oxalic vapor to bees? With the weather warming up this week, should we be going out and vaporizing our hives?
I think it's fine. I don't know if I've seen, real big detrimental impacts on hives yet. I know beekeepers have gone out and treated in the winter if there's a little bit of a mild period. So yeah, I would say go ahead.
I would say go for it, but I'm in Georgia, so I don't know.
No, I agree. I guess in other regions, but I know of beekeepers that go in the winter and do the vaporizer or even dribble, and it works. So.
As they talk, I think of things, forgive me for that, but I used the dribble a lot in the past before vaporization was popular, and it absolutely did work, but I also found out the hard way you don't want to do it more than one time because you will deplete your colony quick.
Yeah, go ahead, Laura.
Bob had mentioned correct temperature for vaporizing. What would you consider that correct temperature to be?
Well, here we go again, Celsius. Fahrenheit, it's between 40. Basically, it is, you don't want to go too warm to where the bees start flying. That's the ceiling. And just go down about 10 degrees to where the colony is loosely clustered. You don't want a tight cluster. So for us in Fahrenheit, that's 42 to perhaps 48 degrees is the sweet spot. I don't know what that is in Celsius. It's just take wherever they start flying, just go down about 5 degrees and that's your sweet spot.
Like 10 degrees, I think.
Bob,
5.5.
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Bob, you mentioned not to trickle twice. I made the same mistake once. But I'm curious, I've thought about this when using trickle, vapor. I haven't used trickle in a while. But in your opinion, if you were to put oxalic strips with glycerin in a colony, would a vaporization react with that, say, if there were still strips left or if it was recent, the same way that trickling?
Well, this is a theory and a guess. So I got to make sure I'm crystal clear on that. I've not really done that, but I don't see can't picture a mechanism to where that's a problem. I mean, I just don't see it being a problem, but I've never done it. That's a vague enough answer for you?
If there's any questions, put up your hand. Otherwise, anyone on the panel. I know we only have one mic we're passing around, so just if you have something to say, gesture to your panel member.
So only to add to that last part that the glycerin method is still not registered in Canada. So, although Health Canada's answers yesterday weren't too strong on that.
Hi, I'm a bit of a newbie, just my 4th or 5th year here, and I wanted to know, you had mentioned, Dani, you had mentioned you crack your hives in March. Around what temperature would you guys say is too early to crack them, that it would affect them as far as the cold?
Local beekeeper.
The bee yards are well protected and they have bales and pellet fences, and as long as the sun is shining and it's above 0, we're not afraid to go in. The bees are warm on the lid. When you open them up, they're not clustered. They're like spaced out. They're running around. That's what I'm looking for. If it starts to get too cold, where it gets cloudy, a wind starts, they start to cluster up, we go home. You can't jam the strips into the middle of a cluster. You just wreck your queens. I sent boys out on Friday to check things out. I wanted to see what was going on in our high mite yards, and we'll go out a few days next week. We just to see what's shaking in those yards. We'll shake, and I'm an aggressive shaker. You now all know that, so I got to know what's going on so I can make some plans.
Yeah, I guess in Ontario it was recommend that if it's less than 10 degrees, just a sneak peek, you can open the lid, check the cluster. If it's 13, 15 degrees, then you can go into the brood chamber. And again, yeah, depends on if it's windy and things like
We're
that.
not pulling any frames out, like, we're just shaking bees
Yeah.
and putting strips in and closing it.
I like when beginners ask me this question, I try to explain that you can walk to the mailbox and back in a t-shirt and you're not going to like it, but you're going to be okay. You can treat a beehive the same way. Just get in and get out and don't mess around and, minimal exposure. That's kind of the way to approach it, in my view.
Like I'm holding the lid up with my elbow.
That's right, yeah. Very minimal exposure. You can lift the lid and have a look. Why not? Just like opening a door and shutting it again.
Ditto.
I like that comment that you're shaking because you want to know what's going on. Earlier working in commercial beekeeping, my approach has changed to now working more involved with the tech team and stuff. And sometimes when I was out in the bee yard with the tech team, and I always have my sample cups with me so I can take my bees home and check them later. And I was dropping off some hives at a site one day, and I just had enough sample cups to check, but you always go home with something that's going to tell you something, right? Because otherwise you just go home guessing. So I always try to, take those sample cups with me, have them with me in the truck when I want to find something out. I don't have time to do it there. And the other thing I'd like to add is I've been talking about integrating more sampling into our activities, and a commercial beekeeper said to me, it's just so hard to introduce this into your workflow sometimes, especially if you don't have many employees. Any little minor adjustment you make into into shaking one colony or 2 colonies or 4 colonies, it's going to adjust how much you can get done in the day, and that builds. But anyways, just wanted to add that note, but go ahead.
Yeah, so like those hives that we're shaking right now, we found them, they were pockets, they were high in the spring, or I'm sorry, in the fall. They kind of caused trouble all last year. I want to be on top of those ones, right? Like those are going to be my troublemakers. The sooner I can look after that problem, the less work it's going to cost me later on, right? So I'm looking to mitigate my risk there and my costs on those GIMP hives that are just going to be nothing but trouble for the next season if I don't get on them.
Yeah, and I guess about time and resources, I learned this from a beekeeper. So we would bring small urine vials, and you just mark them with a marker, roll the bees, put them in the vial, and just take them home. And then you can just use the windshield fluid or whatever, and it's very easy to do it. Don't take a lot of space, and then we use the orbital shaker to do the shakes, unless you want to do some exercise. But
See a question, Jonathan Hofer? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Laura.
Thank you. Specifically for Derek, but some others can weigh in. One of the frustrations that we've had is with the oxalic acid steamer. It's the wrong word, but you know what I mean. Vaporizer. Will there be a concise amount that you can put into? Will it be a published number of that should be used per treatment? The frustration has been that I think it's been recommended one gram, and you can faithfully follow that and do absolutely nothing. And you read some guys, they're using 4 and some are using 6. And could you address that, please?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I mean I get kind of frustrated myself because the label is still 1 gram per box per brood chamber, at least in Canada. I'm not sure if it's different in the States. I know there has been research done, I believe in Florida, Cameron Jack. Bob can say the numbers after, but I think they're like 4 grams per box, maybe something like that, with seeing no real detrimental impacts on the bees. And I believe Saskatchewan is looking at fine-tuning that directive for how much you can put in. and hopefully we get an updated label on that.
Now, Cameron Jack, whom he referenced, has done some really big studies on this. And at 3 grams per 10 frame deep box, you start to see the point of diminishing returns. And by 4 grams, it's over with. There's no 0 point in going over 4 grams unless some of it is escaping. At about 3.25 grams, you're reaching the point of where the money you're spending on the product is probably not well spent. So when people ask me, I just say I shoot between 3 and 4 grams. The precise and concise number, if you wanted to try to use it, is 3.25.
Thank you, Bob.
He doesn't go here.
You can keep your job.
Yeah.
If there's no other answer from the panel, we'll take, we have one more question, and then I'd say it's about last call for questions. So, yeah, go ahead, Jonathan.
Well, I'll squeeze 2 points in. How's that? You said personally it's okay. Can we get the same personally it's okay on the glycerin extended strips from Derek? No, I'm kidding. Talking about doing mite washes, one thing I found really helpful was from watching Bob's videos on just a very simple procedural trick, shaking the frame into a tray and then scooping out of the tray. I've seen so many people trying to get bees from a frame into a cup, but just this trick of just shaking the frame and then scooping it out of that tray, really good idea. Does anybody else have any other shortcuts or tricks?
Well, the frame works. I mean, you don't see us do it, but we do occasionally. But honestly, a lot of what you see in my videos is there because it's meant for the people that are working for me, because occasionally I'll have somebody that's a little new at it. You'll see us making splits kind of for beginners, and you'll see us shaking bees for tests for beginners. I might try to make it for somebody that doesn't have a high skill level, and what you're referring to, dumping bees in a Tupperware tub, really is good at that. You can scrape them up the comb. That works pretty good as long as you're good at it.
We also suggest that a method of we suggest shaking 3 frames per hive into a bucket and then using a scoop. And the idea is that if you're a new beekeeper, it's easy to measure and be consistent. Because if you try other methods and maybe you're shaking 100 bees, then 200 in the other colony, then 500 in the other, and your numbers will be all over the place. So having that half scoop, seeing it, half scoop, and in your shaker, just make things more standard.
So I stand my frame up on end, and I actually run my cup down the frame. Yeah, and the bees, it rolls them into the cup, and that's just how I do it, rather than try and gouge the frame to like scoop them up.
Yeah, that's what we do when we do that. Yeah.
I guess
I've seen Ian do that too.
One other thing, when we usually talk about sampling, we advocate for sampling off a brood frame, but in periods like in early spring or late fall, when there's not much brood in the colonies, I think it's fair to sample off a lid or just somewhere easy where you can get a quick sample and maybe collect a lot more samples instead of actually digging into the colony at that time. So when the mites are kind of a little bit more evenly distributed throughout the colony.
Would you say that shaking? Would you say that I've heard it said that shaking into a tub and then scooping up, particularly in flight weather, that does help separate young and old bees to a certain extent, and we know that we're trying to get the young bees in the sample. Would you say that that's valid?
Yeah, I think there's some validity to that for sure. Yeah, if you shake a brood frame off into a bucket and there's older bees in there, the older ones are going to fly away first and leave the younger bees. And I'm not sure if there's been any scientific studies on that and the accuracy of that. But you also have another look for the queen if the queen happened to be on that frame too. Yeah.
Laura, was that everything there? Okay. I like looking in that wash tub. That one last look for the queen's always good. Why am I crouching down? So I just want to say, like, some of the things I've been hearing is use a method, get good at that method. You want it to be easy or at least efficient. Let's not say easy. Standardize so you can follow up across time. Record keeping, I hear from Dani, which is, I think I've been a little bit lax on that in my commercial beekeeping days. And persistence to be able to enable you to be able to make, informed decision making. There's probably some things I'm missing there, but I think keeping all of these principles in mind when we're looking at our mite levels doesn't seem like a bad idea. Yeah, so I think with that, thank you so much for fielding all these questions, and to all of our guest speakers for being here, and for all the beekeepers for coming out. I know that maybe, I'm not sure if anyone else is going to say a closing word, but I can say that I've heard from a lot of people visiting Manitoba from the trade show and other people that they're very impressed with the turnout here in Manitoba and the community. So myself being here only 2 years, I also really enjoy being here. So yeah, thanks for coming out to the conference.